Welcome back to the CIA Part 1 exam preparation, and today we will be discussing about the Unit 2. It is very important to grasp all the key concepts in the Unit 2 because it comprises of almost 40% of the entire syllabus. Just to have a brief snapshot, in the Unit 1 we talk about mainly the key fundamental concepts of internal audit, and our entire unit revolves around IPPF. It's a framework for internal audit activities. So let's begin with the Unit 2. This is a brief introduction about myself. I wouldn't be repeating again who I am and what my experience is. If you are interested, you can pause the slide and you can read it yourself. This is a very important slide. There are two things that individual candidate for CIA exam has to understand. Um, there is one thing about the knowledge that you have to understand and grasp all the concepts of internal audit and the internal audit related activities. And second, the most important thing is to understand the structure of the exam and which area is more important and which area is least important, the significance of each unit, that everything has been provided by the IIM. So what you are supposed to do is to understand the structure and understand the syllabus and how many MCQs are coming from each unit, and accordingly you prepare your exam. There might be a possibility that I was able to pass my CIA each part within 2 weeks of time, a very short period of time. I wouldn't recommend you to go for the exam within 2 weeks because my circumstances were different. I had extensive audit and accounting background and education. So the CIA course in itself was kind of a refresher for me, rather than I was at the first place understanding the concepts. But one thing which you have to understand, that for every exam, it's important to understand the structure and plan your exam preparation accordingly. So understanding the concept is good, but there might be a possibility, if you do not plan well how you make your preparation, that you might face some negative consequences. So Unit 1 comprises of 15%, and Unit 2, which today we will be discussing, is comprises of 40% of the syllabus. This is how important it is. So you cannot miss out on any concept. You have to understand it very clearly because majority of the MCQs will come from the Unit 2. How many MCQs will be coming? From 120 out of 125 MCQs in the exam, 50 MCQs will be coming mainly from the Unit 2. So this is how important it is. Then a brief snapshot of what we have discussed. Sorry. A brief snapshot of what we have discussed so far. We have covered foundation of internal audit, which mainly revolve around IPPF and talk about internal audit charter. And in today's unit, we will be covering independence, objectivity, due professional care, and quality assurance and improvement program. So this is the Unit 2 as per the GLIM syllabus. And overall, by the end of this presentation, we would have covered around 55% of the entire syllabus. So let's move on to the next slide. This is just a map which I have made it just to give you a mental map, basically a mind map, by which you can understand that how the concepts are being linked in the entire unit. It's mainly talks about independence, objectivity, and within the objectivity there are many key concepts that we need to understand about conflict of interest, some other important topics which has been covered under the internal audit standards, and due professional care, quality assurance, internal audit resources. This is one area which we will be covering, and proficiency. What is proficiency? So these are the key topics which we will be covering. So this mind map basically helps you when you have gone through the entire syllabus and you have referred to your notes. Then you can just have a glimpse of this kind of a picture. You can just take a screenshot to recall your concepts, that what basically comprises of unit 2. So let's start with our first topic, which is independence. I can't argue enough or tell you enough about how important this one concept in entire internal audit career is. Basically, when we talk about internal audit independence, we are talking about internal audit department as a whole, and where it stands within the organization, and what are the role and responsibility of the internal auditors, and are they being allowed to independently carry out their work or not. So one thing, always remember that whenever I'm trying to give you an explanation of any topic, it's basically not only for the IIA exam to pass, but also to apply these concepts in your daily day-to-day work. So internal audit independence is basically an attribute of internal audit department. There might be a possibility that the auditor in itself is being allowed to carry out their work activities at the operational level, but at the strategic level their entire structure has been compromised. How? The first thing which we have to see, that where the internal audit department stands within the organizational org chart. Are they reporting, the internal audit department are reporting to the board or a committee of the board, or are they functionally reporting to the CEO or CFO or a management within a company? Generally, in any organization, the entire for any operational activities, the CEO is responsible. And internal audit, generally when they carry out any audit activities, they identify control weaknesses or other compliance issues, which eventually is the responsibility of the CEO to mitigate or manage those risks effectively and place those controls within the organization. So just in case if the internal auditors are reporting directly to the CEO, their role will be compromised, because they will be identifying weaknesses of the CEO to the CEO. So just to make the internal audit department more independent, the rule of thumb is that the internal audit department should be reporting to a higher authority, which means that to board members or to a committee. We call it normally an audit committee, to the audit committee of the board. So this is a very important element of independence. If that is not the case within the organization, that the internal audit is not reporting either to the audit committee or to the board directly, functionally on a functional matters, then it means that internal audit independence is being compromised. When the internal audit independence is compromised, there is a high possibility that their work activities might be also compromised in terms of being more objective towards when assessing their risk of any operations or any department. Why? With the fear that what if the CEO doesn't like if all the weaknesses, or if they restrict them to bring the kind of weaknesses to the higher authorities which are above the CEO. So in that case, the objectivity of their work and their opinion to assess when they are assessing the work activities is being also compromised. However, there might be a possibility that the internal audit is independent, which means that the internal auditor, the head of internal audit, is basically reporting to the board and audit committee functionally. However, individually, the internal auditor objectivity might compromise despite being independent. How? Maybe there is a conflict of interest. We will discuss this in detail in the next slide, so I would not go in detail, but generally when there is a conflict of interest from the individual auditor level, then there might be a possibility that it might compromise despite being independent. So this distinction, you need to be very clear in your mind that when we talk about internal audit independence, we talk about as a general, as a department, and when we talk about objectivity, it is more towards an individual auditor attribute. So now from this we understand that the internal auditor is supposed to functionally report to the board or board committee, and administratively to the CEO. What does it mean administratively means? It means for their leaves, or maybe for admin related issues, to get their stationaries, to get their offices, to get their laptops. So these are the matters where he can refer to the CEO. However, functionally reporting to the board or audit committee does not mean that he is divorced from the CEO and he cannot tell on the operational matters which he encountered. However, he has to refer back to the management. It is just that their functional reporting, their performance appraisal, their hiring and firing, all these decisions rest with the board, not with the CEO. So annually, the internal auditor is supposed to give an assurance on their organizational independence in terms of that whether internal audit department within the organization is independent or not to the board. Just in case if they have any threats to their independence, that those situations or those threats they have to highlight to the audit committee or to the board. What else? Okay, as I've explained it to you, that when we talk about that internal audit independence, when we talk about internal audit dependence, it means their hiring, their firing, their budget, their remuneration, their role and responsibilities. This is all being evaluated by the board or audit committee, where there is no control of the CEO. However, the CEO can give their opinion about the internal audit head or the internal audit department in general to the audit committee or to the board, but they cannot directly influence. Also, when we talk about the independence, this means that our audit activities, which means our scope of work, our planning, our approval of our audit plan, this all is being approved by the audit committee or the board. Again, there is a level of consultation with the CEO, but that does not give him the ultimate authority over our work. How we ensure that within the organization the internal audit is independent or not, that is reflected in the internal audit charter, because the internal audit charter basically highlights the role and responsibility of internal audit and what are their scope limitation, what are the situations that which constitute scope limitation, to what extent they can go for advisory assignments. So the charter in itself, the terms and the condition in itself reflects by reviewing it, by reading it, and by looking at the reporting, functional reporting of the internal audit, we can ascertain whether the internal audit department is independent or not. Furthermore, whether the charter is being approved by the board or not, that is also reflected in the board meeting or audit committee minutes. So from there also we can assess. The chief audit executive job description is also one of the important documents that we can see whether the internal audit is independent or not, because the role and responsibility is being defined. As a general rule, that internal audit is not operationally responsible for any of the activities of the organization except for the functional responsibility of their department. For example, performance review of their own team, setting KPIs for their own team. So these are things which they are operationally responsible, but outside their function, they are not responsible to take any project and take full responsibility for it. However, they can act as an advisor, uh, but the ultimate responsibility goes to the management, and they will be responsible. So this is one important element that we need to understand about independence. In terms of objectivity, when we talk about, again, the same concept, internal audit independence, when we talk about it, is about the as a whole department. And when we talk about objectivity, it is about the individual in auditor and their attributes. So, in the previous slide, I have given you an example that there might be a possibility that the internal audit department in itself is independent, which means their reporting line is to the board. They are given enough resources. Their role and responsibilities are defined. They are not taking management responsibility. But at the same time, the individual internal auditor who is assigned on an audit engagement might not be objective when they are, or might not be impartial when they are giving an opinion on any of the processes. Why? There might be a possibility that there is a conflict of interest. A conflict of interest is a very crucial topic to understand. How it arises, basically, let's say if this internal audit department manager was previously a finance manager within the company, and now he's moved to internally transferred to internal audit department. So technically, the standards, the IPPF standard says that there is a cooling period, which means that he should not be auditing the finance department for at least 1 year. Because if you send him to the audit the finance department, if he come across any weaknesses within the department and he present it to the head of audit, everyone will question him because he was previously responsible for the same job responsibility, and he is supposed to mitigate or manage those risks. So there might be cases where there is an issue of a personal conflict of interest. Another example is a company allow your family members to work within the company, which is now these days it's very rare, but there might be a possibility that some companies still allow your spouse to work with you in the same company but in a different department. Now you are an auditor and you have to audit the same department, and the head of the department or the person responsible is your spouse or your relative or your brother, and you have to highlight an issue against them. So you will not be an objective. Even if you are objective, there is still an element of in appearance that people will question that you are not fully objective. So these scenarios basically create an issue within the company. There are some other reasons where your objectivity might be compromised, and when we say compromise, the technical term we use is impairment. So whenever your objectivity is compromised due to the external or internal situation, we call it impairment. So always remember this thing. So you are being restricted to the information. This happens most of the time to internal auditor, that the management is scared, or they, for any good or bad reason, they do not allow you to access certain information because they fear that if they give you that information, there might be a possibility of some error or weaknesses or a fraud or misappropriation in which you might encounter, and you report in the audit report, and eventually it will have a negative consequences on their career or their job, or they will be questions. So restriction of access to the information may also impair your objectivity. Resource limitation, where internal auditor are not being provided with proper laptops or budgets, or if they need an expert opinion, they are not being granted access to the experts to get an opinion on a certain matter. So that is also an element. Self-review is the same when the finance manager example I've given you. So when you have done a job, maybe in a consultancy assignment, they requested you something, and then you are assigned to do the same audit of that area. Previously where you provided some consultancy. So in appearance, maybe it might be an impairment of objectivity. Self-interest, for example, it could be that if you highlight an issue, maybe there was a wrongly distributed benefit or given to certain employees certain kind of a benefit by the HR. But when you look into the HR, when you was auditing the HR department, you came to know that they did not had the authority or a policy to bank and give you those kind of benefits, and you are one of the beneficiary of those kind of benefit. So if you report, in that case, your benefits might also be compromised. So that's kind of a example of a self-interest. Familiarity could be a familial relationship where you have family relationship within the company with someone, or you become too close, or you have to audit a department where your best buddy is there and you compromise on your objectivity. Undue influence is where you are being threatened that if you highlight certain issues, you will face a negative consequences, or your promotion will be restricted, or you will have any other kind of a direct or indirect threats. So that could be another possibility of compromising, which may lead to compromise of your objectivity. So these are kind of a situation. If you fell in those kind of situation, there is a high possibility that you might encounter an objectivity issue. Now the question is what to do if you come across such a situation. There are two things. If it is we call impairment of the objectivity, either it's real or it's not real. So let me give you a scenario where it's not real. Means that you felt that there is an objectivity issue, so you go and discuss with the management, and they give you a satisfactory answer to your problems, and then you feel that it is okay now, that there is no harm to your objectivity while doing this audit engagement. So in that case, your key responsibility is to document those conversation and arguments and justification in your preliminary interview or meeting with the management, and make part of your audit report as well, just for the third party reader to understand and have a clarity and transparency. However, if it is a real objectivity threat, maybe you are being restricted to information, or your scope is being compromised, or you are being put under certain kind of a pressure or a threat, in that case you have to discuss with the management, and you have to also discuss, and you have to formally have to report to the audit committee or the board on the impairment of your objectivity. If it is significant, and by which it will not let you to achieve your engagement objective, then you refuse to give an opinion, and you mention there is a part of scope limitation to the audit committee for them to take further action. So this is in a brief nutshell about the entire objectivity and the scenarios. So in the exams, there might be a possibility that you come across different kind of scenarios, and you have to understand whether it's a real threat to your objectivity or it's not real. And if it is real, then you have to report formally to the audit committee or to the board. If it is not real, you have to document and discuss with the management and put those in part of your audit report. Auditor proficiency and competence. This is again similar to the independence and objectivity, where we confuse between those two terms. So this is again similar to that. Proficiency and competence, most of the time people interchangeably use these two terms. However, there is a difference between, and it is important to understand, because this is the key defining moment for you as a good auditor and where you understand all the key terms and apply in your day-to-day audit activities. So proficiency, always remember, is a collective term for the entire audit team. So basically, the collective knowledge of the entire audit department, the skills, the experience, and the behavior, these are known as proficiency. So which means that the internal audit is capable of doing that audit engagement. If there might be not an individual expertise, but collectively they have someone within the department who possess a technical knowledge which they can use their skills and they can apply for audit engagement. However, competence is basically an individual attributes, which means that individual auditor on the assignment possess those skills and have experience and behavior to perform their work in a best possible manner and achieve their objectives. So this is a difference. So whenever we talk about proficiency, it's about the entire team, and whenever we talk about competence, it's about the individual auditor. The chief audit executive or the head of internal audit department is basically the key responsible person who has to ensure that whichever audit engagement they accept, they are proficient enough to carry out their audit activities. And how he can ensure? He can ensure by looking at individual auditor and their skill sets. Just to give you an example, I was working in a telecom company, and there are a lot of technical engineering related assignments that we have to carry out, be it advisory, consultancy, or it was an audit engagement. So at the internal audit department, we had a telecom engineer in our department, we had IT expert in our department, then we had finance background related auditors in our department. So as a department, we were proficient enough to understand the business and to carry out audit engagements. At an individual level, for example, me, I grasped the knowledge, engineering related technical knowledge, while on assignment while working with my other colleague. However, I individually was not competent enough to carry out individually technical audit assignments. So how we fill the gap? We onboard the technical engineering background auditor in the assignments, and also the IT expert in the assignments, and this is how we manage to be proficient in while working for that audit engagement. So this is how we have to ensure. The IIA give you a brief key terms or competencies, we call it, by which you can assess that whether your department as a whole is proficient enough to carry out audit engagements or not. So each individual auditors needs to have an understanding of the ethics, the internal audit framework, we call it IPPF, the mandatory and the recommended guidance. They should be aware of the governance matters, risk and controls. They need to understand the business. They should have an effective communication skills, persuasions and collaborations skills as well. They should be able to think critically, deliver their audit engagement in the best possible manner. They always think about innovation and how they can further improve their skill set. Competencies, basically, always remember that competencies we enhance or we boost our competencies through experience, learning from other, through certification, continuous professional development, trainings, through seminars, through reading. So these are all avenues to learn and make yourself more competent in order to be more beneficial to the organization. Due professional care and CPD. CPD stands for Continuous Professional Development. This is an important area where you have to be very clear. Due professional care means that the internal auditor, they are giving their best to the organization by being organized, by following the proper code of ethics framework, following the internal audit standards, following or in compliance with the policies and procedures. They're documenting their work activities. So this whole in itself reflects that they are being cautious, and they are representing themselves as being professional in the eyes of the management and the board. So this is how they have to perform their work. When it comes to the CPDs, as mentioned, continuous professional development is basically on-job training. You learn from your colleagues, you learn from your superiors. Also through external trainings, you sometimes it is being provided to you, or you yourself take the initiative to go for external trainings, conferences, seminars, appearing in the exams. So this is all the ways by which you develop yourself and stay relevant to the profession and be more useful to the organization. In terms of CPD arts, basically if you are practicing certified internal auditor, then there is a requirement by the Institute of Internal Auditor. In order to maintain your CIA credential, you have to report 40 hours uh, of learning experience that you have to reflect to the IIM. Whereas if you want to show it just a non-practicing chief internal auditor, then you have to obtain 20 hours of training or coaching, these kind of activities, CPDs we call it, and reflect to the Institute of Internal Auditor annually in order to keep your designation. It also include ethics training, so 2 hours of ethics training in both cases is also mandatory. So this is basically a brief nutshell about the due professional care and CPD. A few more points about due professional care: that when you assess any assignments comes to you, you assess the complexity and the extent, and you give the proper due required attention and resources, allocate resource accordingly, and carry out the scope enough that it gives a true reflection of what is being done, and you give a fair opinion on those areas of work. This is also constitute as a due professional care as well. Let me go through quickly, maybe if there is something I'm missing out. Yeah, one more important thing is the cost benefit analysis. So whenever you provide any assurance services, you have to see to what extent you can use your resources and see whether the benefit overweights the expense or not. So that calculation, you have to do it based on your professional experience. You don't have to document it, but generally you have to see that you should be more efficient in carrying out your internal audit activities. So this is also come under the umbrella of due professional care. Quality assurance and improvement program. This is very essential component of internal audit activities, which means that we always stay relevant. We try to embrace new change. We try to learn and deliver in the best possible manner. Basically, QAIP program, it states that the internal auditor always try to find ways of improving themselves by measuring their audit activities. The very basic version of quality assurance and improvement program is to set the KPIs and assess the performance of individual auditors on engagement, and periodically based on those KPIs and assess whether they are doing as intended or not. There are other ways of assessing the quality of internal audit activities is by ensuring that whether the internal auditors are in compliance or use the systematic approach of their policies and procedures, the internal audit policies and procedures, whether they are mindful about the internal audit standards and code of ethics while performing their audit activities. Do they maintain proper decorum and proper protocols when carrying out their field activities in terms of their preliminary interviews, their process level interviews, their sampling methodology, documentation of their work, audit programs, reporting of issues, discussing with the management. So this all needs to be assessed. On the job, it is being assessed by the lead auditor to ensure that the internal auditors are doing the desired quality work, and periodically it is being assessed by the audit manager generally through their performance reviews and assessing through KPIs. At the department level, the head of internal audit basically also assess whether our independence is being intact, if there is any deficiency in terms of skill sets that we have to manage. Our internal audit need any trainings? So this is at the departmental level is being assessed by the head of the internal audit department. So generally ongoing is engagement to engagement, periodically maybe quarterly performance review through KPIs, or half yearly or annually. And external assessment is also important, that we cannot proclaim that we are the only that no one can audit us, and what we say and what we do is the ultimate truth. So basically for that reason, every 5 years internal auditors are required to get an independent assessor and to show all their working papers and audit engagements, and they select on a sample basis a few engagements, and they will tell that which engagement to bring in, and they see all the working papers, whether are we in compliance with the IPPF and policies, internal policies and procedures or not. Our audit findings, they track back to the working papers and our sampling and our methodology, and they assess that whether the internal audit has done a good job or not, or were they in compliance with the standards and policies and code of ethics or not. So they give you a conformance or non-conformance statement. Conformance is basically when the assessors say that we are in compliance generally, reasonably, with all the key fundamental elements of internal audit, which is standards and policies and procedure and code of ethics. And non-conformance is where they say that we either lack or we are or we do not fulfill, or we are in conflict with some of the standards. So those non-conformances basically we have to account for, and then we have to improve further. To assure the quality, we also use tools and techniques. We have to ensure that whether we use modern tools and techniques or not. For example, computer assisted audit techniques, data analytics, maybe AI in the current scenario. So these all constitute whether we are doing our job up to the mark or not. So this is basically the key topic. However, I have to just quickly look at that is there is any other topic that we have to discuss. Otherwise, this is the key fundamental topics which has been covered in Unit 2. There is nothing much more in this unit except for one critical point which I would like to reiterate here is there are 3 types of basically rating in the quality assurance report. Either it's a general conformance, which means that we comply with the standards and all. Partially means where we comply with most, but there are a few which we are missing out. And the last one, which is a negative one, is that we do not conform. So that is the scary part, that where internal auditor competence and proficiency at the same time is being questioned, and which means that if we are not competent, then our opinion does not matter. So these are the 3 types of generally rating, which is being carried out or being used as a guide map by the external quality assurer or assessor to gauge our performance. And this is the last topic of the unit, and by this I will conclude our today's session. And I hope that you now have all the basic and key concepts of the Unit 2, which comprises of 40% of the entire syllabus. And what I would recommend that you quickly go through, if you have time, to the entire unit, skim through it and focus more on the MCQs, because there your knowledge will be assessed. Knowing the concept is one thing and applying the concept is another thing. So sometimes we know the concept, but we either fail or we find it more challenging when you apply those concepts, and these are very tricky concepts because there is a slight bit of differentiation between independence and objectivity, proficiency and competence, quality assurance and improvement program, due professional care. So you need to have a clear understanding, and you, rather than reading it again and again, it's better to go and assess yourself while solving the MCQs, and that in itself is also a learning approach or learning avenue for you. So I wish you good luck and hope to see you in the next unit, which is governance, which is my personally favorite one, and it's very simple, not as complicated as unit 1 and unit 2. So take care and hope to see you in the next video. Lastly, before we conclude, just in case if you benefit from these all study material, and if you have any comments, please do share in the comment section, and also try to reach out to other people who need this kind of resources or material for their CIA preparation, and feel free to share these video with others. Also, your like and your subscription would mean that it will reach out to more people and it will benefit more people. If you feel like, do subscribe and do like this these series of videos, which I will be keep on posting to cover the entire CIA department course. Thank you for watching and hope to see you in the next video.